Hey everyone, and welcome to another episode of MBA Waves. We are going to talk about the metaverse today, an interesting topic that a lot of people are talking about ever since Facebook transformed themselves into Meta, as well as their subsidiaries under the umbrella. And it's kind of this hot topic that everyone wants to talk about, but nobody, as far as I've seen, has a lot to say about it. So before we dive into it, I just want to introduce us. My name is Eric Lucrezia of Candidate Coach. And I've been in the world of admissions, recruitment, education, and coaching for the last 20 years, the last 6 of which have been at ESSEC Business School, where I was director of recruitment for the global MBA program here in Paris, where I'm broadcasting live from, as well as in Singapore. And as always, I'm joined by my fellow creator of MBA Waves, Barra Sapir, who I'll let introduce herself right now.
Hi, everyone. Barra Sapir, City Test Prep and MindFlow. And I work in the test prep space, working with students who want to improve their performance on the test. And we give them skills for getting into the zone and getting their score up and their skills for life, ultimately.
Thanks, Barra. And so MBA Waves, we created about 9-10 months ago at this point. And each week we broadcast live on LinkedIn, Facebook, and YouTube for about 30 minutes. Addressing a different topic each week with often guests, but not always. And if you look at our website, mbawaves.com, you can see each subject we have, or each topic coming up in the future, as well as watching past episodes, which have been recorded, and you can watch them at your own time. But yeah, speaking of guests, it's been a challenge this week. We were hoping to have a couple of guests on today who are a bit more expert on the topic, but it's been a challenge to find people who were up and willing to talk about it. Barra, what have you seen?
Yeah, it's been interesting because I'm in the Bay Area, so I have
Right.
Practically from my window, I can probably spot someone who works with metaverse things, but it's been really challenging. Not everyone is optimistic or positive about the metaverse, and no one, even though I know plenty of people who use, the Oculus. I've got an Oculus, and I've even partaken in events that have been in that virtual reality space. But yeah, I couldn't get anyone to bite.
Yeah. So yeah, this actually, I've been thinking about it for a little while, and then I saw this really interesting article that came from Business Because on the topic of MBAs and how it fits into the whole space of MBAs, business, education, and so forth. And it got me thinking, and I wrote an article about this maybe a month ago. I'll share it in the chat right now if anyone wants to refer to that. So there it is on the chat if you're interested. But I think it bears mentioning what exactly the metaverse is for those people who don't necessarily know. So basically, the metaverse is a collection or like a network of 3D virtual worlds, which are designed to foster social interaction. And it uses advanced human computer interaction hardware as well as software. So users can interact with each other in this metaverse through their digital avatars. Right. Ever since that movie Avatar came out, everyone talks about that word. But in this version, imagine a 3D virtual world where there's an avatar version of yourself where you can interact and do things. And that's had some, I think, some of the most major implications in the whole world of gaming, right? But also like social interaction, media, entertainment. Tourism has been a thing where hotels or resorts can sell their services by way of creating this metaverse or virtual world, basically, where you can see what the hotel's like and what it's going to look like on site in this country. And what's interesting in the future for people who don't have the ability, either because of physical disability or finances, that they can actually kind of have a metaverse vacation. That's something that's kind of on the horizon that people talk about. But in terms of education, that's kind of a big topic. Is the metaverse an appropriate space for education? Now, I think that will vary greatly if we're talking about young children, high school or university, up until the MBA world. There's a lot of different opinions, but it's something that I wanted to talk about today. And well, Barra, since you mentioned as you are from the Bay Area and there's so many people around you, Silicon Valley is at your doorstep. What have you been hearing? What's the buzz in Silicon Valley in California?
Well, what I don't know what the buzz is per se. What I do know is that what has filtered through the many COVID filters of of what's been happening during the pandemic is that I know that I got myself an Oculus, and I used it. I haven't used it that much recently, but I've got to say that the experience was it's a pretty awesome experience if you haven't had that experience before, where you're actually in a space and it really looks three-dimensional, and obviously you're not there because you can still sort of tell that you're in an alternate reality. But I gotta say that there's different rooms and different things that you can do even with the Oculus, where you can meet other people and you can walk from place to place and actually have conversations with people, and it not just be you and your television set playing a game, for example.
Yeah.
So I found it to be really profound. And there was a group, they haven't done it recently, at the beginning of the pandemic, that created a social event that was it wasn't virtual reality, but you did that. One of the pieces that they had was that you could go in and talk to other people in different ways. I mean, even the way that Zoom could be used on other platforms can be created as these multiple rooms and multiple ways that you can interact with people. But the virtual reality piece of it during the pandemic was pretty amazing, considering that there was so much distance between you and other people, right? So I found it to be really fun, and I did go on some tours around. You know, I look back at where I grew up, and you could do that because you can go on these Google Maps and visit. I went with a friend of mine who we didn't know each other before the Bay Area, but we grew up in towns next to each other, and we like showed each other the different places where we had lived,
Oh,
right?
cool.
And so we were able to go on a journey together, for lack of a better word. I'm sure that there's probably other words that are going to come into being, because how do you describe going from place to place with somebody? Um, so, you know, I do hear people using it. Actually, the most I hear people using the Oculus for is for the exercise platform they've got on there.
So before you go on, maybe, like, because not everyone knows what the Oculus is, maybe you want to like
Sure.
explain what's the Oculus.
So my limited understanding of what it is it's a headpiece that you put on,
Right.
and it covers up your eyes completely, and it basically projects a movie screen in front of you, but it's in almost three dimensions, so that when you move around, you're able to see all the way around you the way you would at a planetarium, but
Mhm.
there's even less space, right? So you're actually the center point, and everything that you see looking down, looking out, is that new universe, that new virtual reality. So
Yeah.
when you see it portrayed in films, like I've seen it portrayed, Ready Set. There was a virtual reality sci-fi dystopian film I saw. Uh, it really is accurate, because you really do feel like you're in a different place, but it is an illustration usually, unless you go to some of these Google Maps, in which you're not seeing films of it necessarily. You're just seeing, stills, kind of.
Exactly. So it's basically a headset, this Oculus, and I've actually experienced it firsthand. First through a friend, my friend named Alno Labelle, and he's making films, and he actually asked me to do a voiceover for one of these like 3D immersive short films, and it's pretty cool. Like when you're inside there, you really feel like you're there, and it kind of it tricks your brain, and I think that's the key to this conversation, right? When I'm going to get into networking later, and in terms of creating a very real feeling experience, tricks your brain to believing you're there. And probably most of you have seen those memes where somebody's got a virtual headset on and they're playing some kind of game like Kung Fu Fighting or something, and they just run into a wall. It's like pretty hilarious, like making you believe that you're there so much that you end up colliding with reality. So,
It's easier to suspend disbelief when you're wearing it.
yeah,
Like when you're in a movie theater and you're watching a movie in front of you, there are moments where you get so into what you're seeing and that you lose yourself. And that's actually some of the work that I do with hypnosis and neurolinguistic programming, is like
mm,
the movies we make. The difference is that this is even closer to all that. Like this is really being in that space,
mm,
and it's immersive. And so the brain actually can't tell the difference once it that barrier of reality
right.
is it's pretty amazing.
Because the movie screens, they're flat, they're 2D, and this is like a 3D but surround, image that has depth and so forth. I've even heard this technology being used for criminals, like for example, sexual assault, rape criminals, that puts them in a version of themselves, like an avatar of themselves, or they're much smaller than a potential person that they might consider attacking physically or sexually or whatever. And it gives them a perspective of being small and like they are dominant. And so it's meant to condition them to consider what it's like to be dominated, right? And also for survivors to have the experience of being strong. So it's a way to condition your brain. And there's so many implications of this. It's hard to say where it's going to go, but to bring it back to what we're talking about, education and so forth, first of all, there's requirements, right? You need the software, you need certain hardware besides the Oculus, the masks or helmets, whatever you want to call them. There's other pieces. Like I've played some video games, some interactive video, right, with my cousin. Now, she's in New York. She's about 17 or 18 now, and she's been very much into the world of gaming. And I've gone into these virtual game rooms with her with these handsets and stuff that either vibrate or like whether it's maybe, I've seen this also with flight simulators where the controls push back and there's a certain resistance. So you really get the impression, the feeling that you're doing something physical. So it's that tricking the brain thing and creating this world that replicates reality so much that our senses make us believe that we're there. And where I think this has really interesting implications in education is for very much experiential learning. If we're talking about kids, it could be like a field trip, and as much fun as it is to go to the zoo and touch animals and so on, like maybe for a whole host of reasons, it's not possible. Again, money, space, timing, maybe it's a pandemic situation that allows people to learn and experience things without limitation. Obviously, there's the requirement of the cost, right, of the hardware and the software, but that's interesting for kids. And accelerating to the age level where you might be doing an MBA, so like 20s to 30s, right? These are people who are working professionals who've decided to take a year or two to invest in doing an MBA, and all of those great things you're going to learn in an MBA program, whether it's finance, marketing, management, all those things, you can learn those from books. You can learn those from online modules. I think the real key piece in an MBA where in-person has so much more impact is the networking piece, right? And like meeting future employers, going to networking events, talking to alumni, all about making that human connection. And I think that's where, for the moment, the online MBAs fall short, right? You don't have those moments where you're looking someone in the eye, having a drink somewhere, shaking hands, like feeling the pressure of a handshake. If you can create in the metaverse a networking space where you have an avatar version of yourself and you're interacting and moving around a space and your brain is convinced that you're talking to these different people in person, and they're able to like shake hands and feel the pressure of that handshake. And who knows, maybe in the future you'll be able to taste wine and really feel like you're at the event. I think that is what elicits that human connection that makes the bonds between us stronger. And I think it's the human connection that makes that alumni network so powerful, that the people that you've interacted with, that you've suffered with during that MBA, you've struggled and worked hard and achieved something, those feelings are what motivate us as humans to want to go the extra mile for people who are in our network, to maybe connect you to an interview or share opportunities or invest in your company. All of these things that the network piece that is so important in the MBA world, I think the metaverse has a capacity to create for us in a virtual way, which is kind of the theme of today. I don't know if like all of that makes sense to you, Bara.
Yeah, no, it does make sense. And because I've been to some of these different social events in the metaverse, I can see how it works. There's one platform, I don't know the name of it. I could find out and we could post it. But someone had created this field, I'll call it a field, where you move around. And I don't remember what the apparatus was because I thought I was just using my computer. I wasn't using the Oculus. But you walk around, but I have experienced this on the Oculus. You move and you move using these hand pieces with the Oculus, and you come upon a group of people, and then you could just start talking to them, and they're just strangers. And you can't necessarily look in their eyes, but you can feel their presence. And because it's their voice, that's really the sensation of you are in that space. So you don't quite you feel yourself moving kind of, but you don't get the eye contact.
Right.
And what's interesting about this is, what does that mean? I mean, like one of the articles that you shared with me talked about, like, you don't smell the person, you don't have the, even like the unconscious experience of just someone's energy, right? When you meet someone, you can tell if they've got frenetic energy or they're calm. And you can tell more of that. I feel like during the pandemic, I feel like I've gotten a lot better even at being able to read, I won't call them social cues, but read other people, right? That you would read people in a real space. So I do think that the networking piece that you're talking about has a lot of room to grow right now with this apparatus, and not only room to grow, but they can capitalize on these different pieces. The other thing I think that it does is that when we even meet someone one time, like you and I haven't met in person, right?
No.
But I do have such a feeling for you because we've been working together for the past year.
Right.
But I remember one of the first weeks that we spoke, I said, you're going to be surprised to know that I'm 5 feet, right? You and Petty were like, you're 5. I'm like, I'm 5 feet, right? Because here we're just about, on my screen, we're just about the same height. But when we meet in person, you're probably a lot taller than I am. So there's all of these conditioned beliefs, like you were talking about them using it for crime and for crime prevention, probably, that you feel in the moment in real life that you can simulate, but it might not translate to real life necessarily so easily. So then your brain has to do this calibration.
Right.
Real life versus what you experienced, even for a long time, like us when we meet in person, what that's going to be.
Right. Looking forward to it. No, it's interesting what you say about like the height thing, for example. Like in a way, like this 2D online thing that we've been doing is sort of like an equalizer, right? Like we're looking like the same height on the screen, but in reality, it's not going to be. I'm 6'4" and you're 5 foot, so in centimeters, that's like I'm 193 and you're like, I don't know, 158 or something. It's like it's a big gap, right? But here we are on the screen. There's maybe an advantage to that as an equalizer, but also like, well, there's a lot of talk these days about how to do online MBA fairs successfully, how to interview successfully online. And the people who are going to pick up quickly those skills about making good eye contact and the certain things that you adjust to make it work. In the future, who knows? I mean, I mentioned in this article, there's this Japanese professor. I'm not sure if he's Japanese, but he's a professor at the University of Tokyo, I believe, that came up with this like screen on a smartphone that you can lick and taste certain things like coffee and chocolate and a few other things, toast, I believe there was. It sounds totally weird right now, but who knows what that could expand to. And like maybe you mentioned frenetic energy or energy of people in general, which plays into like, do you connect with that person? Do they make you like feel good and welcome and safe, or do they rub you the wrong way? Like who knows, maybe in the future there'll be a way that technology picks up on that energy, or I want to say pheromones, but it's probably not the right word, but like the natural smells and stuff, the whole olfactory senses that we have and probably are far less conscious of, that play into whether we get along with somebody or like them romantically or respect them and so forth. It's very interesting.
They did have, I've never experienced it, but there was a period of time where the movie industry created these smells while you were watching movies. And I just remember reading about it, that you would go into the movie theater and then whatever you were watching, they would waft in these smells while you were watching the movie. And not just popcorn, like things that, so that's, I feel like this is what you're talking about with this professor and licking your screen, which sounds like in post-pandemic world, incredibly unsavory. Like there's nothing, like that's probably the last thing that I'd want to do.
I'm loving your pun there, unsavory, by the way.
I mean, it just sounds awful. I mean, you do have the scratch perfume pieces in, these cards in magazines. I can see something like that, like a card that would come along with something that feels much more sanitary, but it's super interesting. Like, I don't even know how the technology would be if it's not, like, how would they emit smell or taste on a phone? Like that's amazing that it would have to be.
Odors, smells are all just chemicals, right? They're mostly benzene rings like I was a chemistry minor. We had to literally produce essence of cinnamon oil, and it was a whole chemical reaction with all different steps, like 30 steps. Boil this, sift it out, filter this, whatever, and we made cinnamon oil. You wouldn't dare drink it, but it smelled exactly like it, powerfully. And so, with a bunch of, like, who knows, like little, I don't know, pods in your phone or in your computer that would be ready to emit certain combinations of chemicals could produce it. It's possible. Like, the question is getting it small enough to fit into your device. It's interesting. You said also scratch, that word caught my brain. Like, maybe think of scratch and sniff stickers like in the 70s and 80s, which were like maybe the first, like the most analog version of the metaverse possible. Like, you'd scratch this little strawberry shaped sticker and it would smell like strawberries. Yeah.
I'm surprised those aren't around anymore. Those seem to have gone out of style.
Maybe they're not COVID friendly.
I think they were gone before COVID, but I don't know. I don't have kids, so.
But some people in academia, in the whole business school world, have been commenting on it, like sharing what they've been doing already. Again, we've talked about COVID being a great accelerator already in previous episodes, that, we've already been on this digital path for like 10 years or so now. There've already been, online MBAs and digital solutions for things. And COVID just forced us to rethink things and, in an urgent way, come up with solutions for stuff. But I remember even when I was working at ESSEC before COVID, they did invest in a handful of these Oculus headset things, and they were able to do some kind of virtual visits. And it's just kind of pushed things in that direction, even more. And what ESSEC did when COVID struck, they made the decision, because throughout the MBA at ESSEC, it's a 1-year program. They have the campus, like I said, in Paris and Singapore, and it was pretty commonplace that MBA students would go to the other campus, and it was an opportunity for to companies in that country to network, to learn how business is done in that country, and so forth. And for 2 reasons, they decided to cut all long haul flights or travel during the program, and those are for economic reasons. So they're able to, keep costs lower for the tuition for the program by doing it virtually. Of course, there's the investment in the software and the hardware, but once that's there, they don't need to continue to increase prices because of increased travel costs. And considering the war in Ukraine right now, fuel prices are going up, and that's definitely a thing. The other thing is to reduce carbon footprint. And it seems to be a more ecologically responsible move to do things virtually and go the way of the metaverse, in order to create those experiences where back, even before they come, when it's like MBA fairs, interviews, campus visits, to actual, networking events, meeting alumni from other parts of the world, and so forth. So that's something that, they're talking about, they're putting in place already. And a couple of other deans from business schools have been, commenting that this is the direction they think it's going to go. There was this article where they say, MBA program or business school deans are predicting this is definitely the future for MBAs. And, I don't know, part of the whole MBA experience is that travel. So I don't know how people are going to feel, if they feel this is the way to go, or that's like a shame. They would prefer to go in person. But
well, it sure would be nice if we had a different fuel system, because I think if we had a cleaner fuel, and that was able to prompt travel so that we don't have as much waste and we're not as reliant on fossil fuels.
yeah.
I think that might also be a game changer. But I'll just throw this in there, like Bitcoins. I don't know much about the Bitcoin industry, but I do know that they've got these huge data centers that actually are not very environmentally sound at all. So, there seems to be, in my mind, I put together like the Oculus, virtual reality, and Bitcoin, and this sort of like this virtual financial system, right? and yet Bitcoin is actually not environmentally sound at all.
Yeah, so it comes down to the mining of cryptocurrencies, and that mining process takes these like mega computers that are working nonstop. And the example that seems to circulate is that some of these Bitcoin mining operations consume more energy than the entire country of Slovakia. That was one of the examples I heard, which is just shameful. There has to be some kind of push for legislation that if crypto, all currencies, not just Bitcoin, is going to continue to develop, they have to do so in a green way, an eco-friendly way. And again, I talked about COVID being a great accelerator for for moving towards the digital solutions. It should also be a great accelerator for moving towards green solutions. I mean, I just think that if corporations and governments are not taking the opportunity in this situation of COVID and the war in Ukraine, which hopefully ends soon and is very contained, it's either laziness or greed or a combination of the two that is impeding that from happening. It really, anyway, I don't want to get political, I guess, if we're too late, right? But something that's important to consider is to make this work, to make the metaverse work, it requires a whole bunch of bandwidth, right? The amount of data that can be transmitted in a certain amount of time, the speed and the reliability of it. You know, something that came up during the beginning of, or a couple of weeks into the Ukraine war, was how Elon Musk offered services of, I think, SpaceX to provide internet services in the event that Russia cut that from them. And that's great, by the way. He also provided an opportunity for people working at, I think, at Tesla in Ukraine to continue to get paid their salary if they signed up to fight. So that's an interesting support too. But again, not to get into the war too much, but you know, something that we count on is Wi-Fi or internet connection, 3G, 4G, or wherever you're at, wherever you are in the world. For some places, for some people, internet connections almost become a human right. Like, depending on where you are, again, you know, water or healthcare or whatever it may be, it's that important, you know. And if we're going to start depending on this world of the metaverse in the future, what does that mean for the positioning and the power of the companies that are providing internet services? Like Amazon provides for so many companies. They're providing for not only the US government, but like LinkedIn, like Facebook, like all these companies. Amazon's web services, AWS, is the biggest part of the Amazon empire. And we put a lot of trust and so forth into that. And, you know, as we go paperless for a lot of things, we digitize our government records, our bank statements, all these different things. What happens when we can't access the internet at some point, you know? So there's this understandable reticence to go fully digital on certain things. Like, we, at the end of the day, are physical. We are human or plants or rocks or whatever, you know, like they're, you know, so it's, I think there's so many interesting opportunities and implications, especially with the growing global population and the impact on the environment.
And the threats, well, there's threats today that, like, of cyber attacks. I mean, the US is bracing now for cyber attacks from Russia, that we're getting intelligence saying that it's probably going to be happening. Like, we've known it's going to happen. And so then what happens? You know, then what happens when we're not able to access our bank accounts or the water grid or electricity? You know, what happens when a country decides that they want to shut down another one?
Right. It also makes me think about, like, what is the future of governance for this? Like the internet itself, you know, there was talk, I remember this goes back like 15 years ago, they were talking about, because, you know, as so many people have been sending emails and companies sending their bills via email, the postal system, at least in the US, I'll speak about, that has been, you know, losing revenue because people aren't buying stamps anymore, right? So what does that mean? Do they want to start charging, like, you know, half a cent for each email you send? I remember that was a conversation. I haven't heard much movement on that, but the whole concept of the free internet has been, even a couple of years ago, there was talk about that. So what does that mean for the metaverse? You know, it makes me think about, like, okay, the architects of this future metaverse that we're going to probably experience in our lifetimes, you know, what's being put in place to make sure that it's free and accessible to all people from wherever you are in the world, whatever your demographic situation is. You know, that's something interesting to think about, and to make sure that it is free. And then I also think about, like, I don't know, I think I'm making up a word here, but like metaphobia, like people who are just like not into it, like whether it's as simple as the Oculus itself that get like claustrophobic in that, or the opposite, like they're in the metaverse and they get agoraphobic and they just like can't handle being in the open space. You know what I mean? There's a whole bunch of things to think about.
Or think about the Matrix, right?
Oh my
Like,
gosh.
think about, you know, like getting plugged in a particular way. I mean, it's a metaphor, but in some ways that is really happening. And they were experiencing life in this alternative reality.
Yeah.
Or were they?
Yeah, that's kind of creepy, that whole storyline. So yeah, we're on the half an hour now. Honestly, I'm not seeing any questions coming in, at least on StreamYard. But if there are any questions you guys have, you want to ask from the audience, now's the time to make any comments or ask any questions. Not that we're any kind of experts, but we just wanted to talk about this because I think it's really relevant, and it would be amiss not to talk about.
It's good to just recognize that this is the beginning of something. We're just really at the really, even though it's been going on. I mean, we saw this in the Jetsons, right? When I was growing up, right? We saw those pieces then, but it's really becoming a reality now. And so how is that going to affect all of us? And how is it going to affect students, right? Within the next 5 years, it probably will affect students in some way. I would gander, I guess, there.
Absolutely. Well, once again, I don't see any questions, so I think we'll wrap it up there. It was really good to talk to you, Bara, about this. Super interesting.
Fun.
Yeah. As always, MBA Waves will be on next Tuesday every week. And next week, we'll be talking about the hidden advantages of taking the GMAT or GRE. And we do have a guest lined up, our friend Vinay Narang from GMAT Genius. So that's next Tuesday, March 29th. Same bet channel, 7 p.m. Paris time, 10 a.m. San Francisco time. And we look forward to seeing you there. And if you have any questions, you can prepare them now, and Vinay, Bara, I will be happy to answer. So thanks, and bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.